The night hung heavy and still. A hush pressed over the wide expanse of the frontier. Then, from the shadows, the steady echo of boots against cracked earth shattered the silence. Deliberate, cautious footsteps nearing a weather-beaten cabin cloaked in moonlight. Inside, she sat alone, unseen and untouched by the world beyond those rough wooden walls. For years, she had lived like a ghost, a woman confined by invisible chains more binding than iron. Her freedom swallowed by silence and shadow. But tonight, everything was about to change. The land stretched out in every direction. Parched soil cracked under the weight of dry winds. Distant silhouettes of jagged mountains etched against a pitch-black sky. The scent of sagebrush mixed with the faint smoke rising from a dying campfire miles away. This isolated pocket of the West was both refuge and prison, a place where the rules were as unyielding as the rocks, and where freedom was as scarce as rain. She had carved her existence here, quiet, unseen, and caged by tradition and fear. Her name was whispered only by the wind, if at all. To the townsfolk and wanderers who passed, she was nothing more than a shadow on the periphery, a woman whose life was held captive by the expectations and judgments of a world that refused to notice her. Her hands rested on the rough wood of the table, trembling slightly, part weariness, part a fierce yearning for a life that seemed forever beyond reach. Every day was measured and muted, a slow unraveling behind closed doors. Yet beyond the horizon, across the vast plains, a figure moved with purpose that defied the rules of both his people and the trespassing settlers. He was a guerrero Apache, a warrior marked not only by paint and tradition, but by a restless spirit that broke every boundary set before him. Known to both friend and foe for his relentless defiance, he was an enigma wrapped in the dust and fire of the land, carrying the weight of centuries, yet acting with a singular, unyielding will. Tonight, he stepped closer to the cabin that had become her cage. His eyes, fierce but respectful, scanned the quiet landscape, sensing the invisible chains that bound the woman within. There was something, a force deeper than rebellion, that propelled him forward, drawing him across cultural divides and the sharp lines drawn by history and suspicion. He reached the door, his hand hovering near the latch, heart pounding not just from danger, but from a spark he had never anticipated. The door creaked open against his touch, a crack in the silence that mirrored the crack forming in the walls of her solitude. Their eyes met for the first time, hers wide with disbelief, his steady with intent. No words were spoken, but the air swelled with unspoken understanding, a fragile thread weaving a connection between two souls who had known only isolation and the harsh dictates of their worlds. Behind them, the night deepened, and unseen dangers stirred. The rules that governed their lives had been clear and merciless. Yet with this break, the fragile balance teetered. Each heartbeat marked not only the possibility of freedom, but the looming threat of exposure and retribution. Their secret meeting was a spark in dry tinder, a challenge to every taboo that had kept them shackled. Then, just as the first fragile step toward trust was taken, a distant sound fractured the stillness. The low rumble of horses gathering in the dark. Their riders, cloaked in shadows, as menacing as the night itself. This was no chance encounter. Forces beyond their understanding were closing in, bringing danger that neither could face alone. The frontier's silence was broken not by nature, but by the gathering storm of those who would tear apart the fragile hope blooming behind the cabin's door. Many comrades who trek these forgotten trails have told us the truth. Destiny, or that cunning YouTube algorithm, sometimes strips away your subscription without warning. Before the next perilous path is revealed and a new twist unfolds, take a quick glance below the video and make sure you're still riding with our band. We don't want you losing track of the voices echoing through this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The distant thunder of hooves grabbed the night like a breaking wave against a fragile shore. Shadows grew longer, sharp and restless as the riders drew closer. Figures carved from darkness and intent, their horses' breath billowing ghostly clouds into the cold air. The guerrero Apache's eyes flicked toward the faint sounds, muscles tensing beneath weathered skin. He stepped back, the creak of the door sliding shut behind him, a soft promise sent into the stillness, but not without cost. Behind those walls, the woman, silent, unseen, had risked everything to open that fragile window to trust. The echoes of horses drew nearer, deliberate and unyielding. Each beat became a drum of danger pounding through the quiet landscape. She caught her breath, palms pressed to the worn wood of her cabin, heart a wild thing locked in a cage of hope and fear. The guerrero's fierce gaze held hers just a moment longer, an unspoken vow passing between them like a whispered prayer. He turned, weaving shadow and silence, slipping toward the back where twisted roots and brambles tangled like the secrets they both carried. Outside, the night swelled with the raw smell of earth and sage, dry and biting. His footsteps brushed lightly on cracked soil as he vanished behind the outcropping of rocks that hid a narrow path down the slope. The PATRULHA was relentless, men who had long forgotten mercy, carrying orders sharpened by prejudice and desperation. The air throbbed with the threat of discovery, and the woman's hands clenched at the table. Her breath caught in a sudden sob, then steadied. She would not let fear claim her, not tonight. Inside the cabin, the dim lantern flickered, casting trembling shadows that danced like restless spirits. She moved nearer to the fireplace, knuckles white on the mantel. Memories pressed heavy, ghosts of days long slipped away, chains forged by suspicion, years penned by loneliness. Yet something had shifted, something in that brief look shared with the guerrero that had fractured her solitude. Against the tide of tradition and silence, the whisper of a fragile alliance was born. Outside, the riders' voices spilled low and rough, like a gathering storm. The PATRULHA crept closer, rifles glinting faintly under the silver wash of moonlight. They moved with cold precision, unaware of the flickering light that betrayed the cabin's fragile secret. The guerrero traced the hidden path, each step an act of desperation and defiance, a dance between survival and the unknown. His mind raced through memories of burned villages and lost tribes, a lifetime balanced on the edge of extinction and dignity. Tonight, among these foreign walls, he carried the weight of a people's scars, and a sliver of hope. Inside, the woman's breath fell into steady rhythm. She fetched a small tin beneath the floorboards, her only weapon, and held it tight. The gravity of the moment pressed against her ribcage like stone. She was no stranger to danger, but this was different. Across the invisible divide between them and the hunting predators beyond, she felt the fragile lines that separated imprisonment and freedom blur. She was no longer alone. A distant shout shattered the quiet, the sharp bark of a command slicing through the night air. Horses reared, hooves pounding in reply. The PATRULHA had spotted something, or heard a whisper in the wind. The guerrero froze, hand resting silently on the aged rock face. The pounding grew louder, closer, unstoppable. He looked back toward the cabin, where a faint glimmer of light promised sanctuary and peril entwined. Suddenly, from the north, a single rider appeared, a solitary figure, racing hard against the shadows. His face was etched with urgency, eyes wild with warning. The guerrero's muscles coiled. Recognition flickered. A fellow warrior or a vengeful scout? The woman held her breath, watching the dance of approaching danger and fragile hope collide. The rider galloped through the night, voice hoarse but commanding. "They're closing in fast. We don't have more than minutes before they surround this place." His words struck like lightning, setting fire to every aching nerve. The guerrero's jaw clenched. The fragile alliance they had just begun to forge was now a beacon, drawing vultures in a merciless, circling dance. There was no turning back. The woman's silent prison had become a battleground of wills, histories, and lives hanging by the thinnest threads. She stepped toward the door, eyes sharp with resolve, despite the trembling hands. Tonight, silence would shatter. She no longer belonged to shadow and chains, but to something unknown and raw, a fragile blazing spark that could burn them all or lead to dawn's first light. In the distance, the PATRULHA formed a deadly ring, their whispers thick with threat and anticipation. Yet between the cabin and the gathering storm stood two unlikely souls, bound by a secret, born in defiance and desperation. Suddenly, as the first horse crossed the ridge's crest, a sharp, piercing cry tore through the air, a call not of men, but of the land itself, wild and ancient. A guerrero's hand shot to his chest, fingers curling into a desperate fist over a symbol worn beneath his shirt, an emblem of his tribe's undying spirit. The woman's eyes locked with his, wide and desperate. "Tonight, they won't just chase shadows," he whispered, voice low and cutting through the cold like a blade. "They hunt a fire they cannot put out." The wind shifted. The night closed in, and somewhere beyond the mountains, the first echo of a horn, deep, mournful, and wild, signaled the coming of a force neither frontier nor fear had yet stirred. The cabin door burst open from behind, splintering wood and shouts ringing out. The dance of survival and destiny had just erupted, and neither prisoner nor predator was prepared for what the breaking dawn would bring. The crack of the door, splintering, echoed into the cold night air, an abrupt, violent shatter that ripped through the fragile silence they had dared to share. The woman's heart plunged, icy terror flooding through her veins, as shards of wood spilled onto the dusty floor like fractured promises. Outside, the sharp chorus of shouted commands rose, rough voices sliced by desperation and steel, crawling closer with every breath of the wind. He pressed himself deep into the shadowed crags, every muscle taut as wire, feeling the ground tremble beneath the pounding of hooves. His dark eyes flickered across the gathering shapes. The PATRULHA, circling with relentless precision, their rifles catching pale moonlight like hungry eyes gleaming in the night. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision. Inside, the woman crouched low, knuckles bruised as she gripped the tiny tin beneath the floorboards. A pitiful weapon, yet all she had. Her breath came ragged, a fragile rhythm broken by the distant crunch of boots on gravel outside. Yet beneath the terror, a fierce resolve ignited, smoldering against years of silence and fear. No longer a ghost behind these walls, she was a sentinel, a last line between her fragile hope and the merciless storm. The crash of the cabin door had stirred a chaotic uproar. Men burst in, shadows crashing over the floorboards, rifles raised with merciless intent. But the woman's eyes, locked on the path outside, where the guerrero APACHE moved with ghost-like grace, weaving through rocks and thorn, his pulse a thunder drumming fury and purpose. His hand reached instinctively to the emblem pressed to his chest, a worn symbol, heavy with the weight of a people long hunted. The PATRULHA's voices grew frantic, splitting the night with curses and orders, tangled in fear. They pushed inward, unaware of the fierce bond now tethering their prey and protector. Unaware that in this small, battered cabin, something far greater than mere survival had been set aflame. A rough shout drew the woman's gaze to the door again. Another rider, a silhouette racing hard toward them from the north, cutting through the darkness like a blade. His face was carved from urgency, eyes blazing with unspoken warning. The guerrero's muscles coiled immediately, recognition flashing like lightning. Friend or foe, ally or betrayer. Time offered no choice but to trust the unspoken truth in that wild, shattered gaze. "They are closing faster than our breath can carry," the rider gasped, voice raw as the land itself. "Minutes, no more." The woman's pulse hammered, the seconds stretching thin as wire. Sliding to the door, she met the guerrero's eyes, unflinching, fierce, hungry for a chance that seemed both impossible and necessary. He nodded once, the barest motion sending strength flowing back through her trembling limbs. They were now entwined in something no fear could undo. An alliance born of desperation, defiance, and a fragile whisper of hope. Outside, hoofbeats thundered closer. A relentless drum rolling over cracked earth and tangled sagebrush. The PATRULHA circled tighter, boots carving circles of impending doom, rifles leveled like hawks' talons. Yet in the midst of closing shadows, a sudden piercing cry shattered the night. A wild, ancient call carried on the wind, raw and primal as the land itself. The guerrero's sharp breath caught, fingers tightening, clenching the emblem beneath his shirt. It was more than a cry. It was a summons, a challenge from the very spirit of the frontier, refusing to bow before the cold machinery of man's persecution. The woman stepped forward, unarmed but unyielding, her voice barely above a whisper, but trembling with fierce determination. "We won't go quietly into their night." Her words hung like a fragile banner, pulled taut between fear and courage. The distant ridge suddenly burst into chaos. Horses reared, riders cursing, as gunfire spat sparks into the darkness. The cabin shook with the first blows of the raid. A splintering of wood, a shattering of fragile walls, the igniting of a reckoning long overdue. In the blaze of lantern light and shadow, the guerrero slipped past the chaos, leading the woman through a narrow, hidden path winding beneath thorny branches and broken earth. Their flight was desperate, every step a gamble against the tightening noose of the PATRULHA's ruthless hunt. His voice was low, urgent. "They come not just for me, for us, for every whisper of defiance left breathing in this land." She nodded, eyes burning with a newfound fire. "Then we fight, not for freedom alone, but for every voice they've tried to silence." The path plunged into darkness, but behind them, the night roared alive with the cruel clamor of hunters closing in. The fragile silence shattered forever. Between the endless plains and jagged mountains, an ancient feud rekindled, a battle not merely for survival, but for the soul of a land aching under the weight of history. Suddenly, a shadow broke free from the fringes, an unexpected figure emerging from the depths of the woods, his face obscured, but his intent undeniable. Hands raised in warning, he called out, "Hold fast! The PATRULHA isn't just a manhunt, it's a reckoning. They bring fire, and with it, a war no one yet sees coming." The guerrero's eyes narrowed, sensing the tremors beneath his feet, the shifting winds of fate gathering like storms on the horizon. The woman's breath caught, her cage shattered, but replaced by the raw edge of peril and resolve. Behind them, the echo of hooves multiplied, the relentless drum of death approaching. Yet in their hearts, a fragile flame glowed, an ember cast from pain, hope, and unbreakable will. And then, as the first clawed muzzle of dawn tore into the suffocating night, a fierce cry split the air, not a surrender, but a summons to reckoning. Wild and unyielding, the guerrero turned, voice sharp and low. They chase a fire too fierce to burn. Tonight, the frontier will bleed, and no shadow will hide the truths it carries. The woman's eyes locked onto the rising light breaking over the ridge, a silent promise between them, and the battle about to ignite beyond the shattered walls. Suddenly, a crack rang out, different from guns. A shot fired close and deliberate, cutting through the chaos, and freezing everything with a single, shattering word: betrayal. The crack of the door splintering echoed into the cold night air, an abrupt, violent shatter that ripped through the fragile silence they had dared to share. The sharp chorus of shouted commands rose, rough voices sliced by desperation and steel, crawling closer with every breath of the wind. He pressed deep into the shadowed crags, muscles taut as wire, sensing the trembling earth beneath the pounding of hooves. Moonlight danced on rifles, raised like hungry talons, the PATRULHA circling with unyielding precision. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision that would shatter the fragile hope kindled just moments before. Inside, the woman crouched low, knuckles bruised as she gripped the tiny tin hidden beneath the floorboards, a token of defiance against the merciless night. Her breath came ragged, each inhale a tight thread stretched between terror and resolve. Years of silence and shadow had carved deep lines of fear, but now a different fire smoldered beneath her ribs, raw and fierce. The splintered wood thudded against the floor, debris falling like fractured promises. Men burst in, voices crashing over the worn floorboards, eyes wild with relentless intent. Yet in the chaos, her gaze was fixed beyond the cabin's walls, where the guerrero APACHE moved with ghost-like grace, weaving between rocks and thorn. His dark eyes flared with desperation, hand clutching the weathered emblem pressed beneath his shirt, a symbol heavier than any rifle they bore. Shouts erupted, splitting the night's thickness with curses tangled in fear. The PATRULHA pressed, as relentless as the land itself, unaware of the bond now forged in that shadowed cabin, unaware that beneath broken walls, something vast and fragile had ignited. Suddenly, a rider hurtled through the dark from the north, a silhouette carved from urgency. His face was a storm of dread and command, eyes blazing wild warning. The guerrero's body tensed, the flicker of recognition a flash of lightning. Friend or foe, hope or doom. Time offered no choice but trust born from desperation. "They're closing fast," the rider gasped, voice raw with the breath of chasing ghosts. Minutes, maybe less. Every heartbeat hammered in the woman's chest like a war drum. She slid towards the broken door, meeting the guerrero's fierce gaze. His nod was barely a movement, but it sent strength flooding through her trembling frame. No longer prisoner or pursuer, they stood entwined by fate's cruel hand, united by defiance's fragile whisper. Outside, the pounding of hooves rolled relentless over cracked earth and sagebrush tangles. Rifles gleamed pale under the moon's indifferent watch, leveled like hawks' talons poised for destruction. Then, a piercing cry tore through the night, a call raw and ancient, wild as the land itself. The guerrero's sharp breath caught, fingers tightening around his tribe's emblem. This was more than a war cry. It was a summons, a challenge from the frontier's soul, refusing to bow before merciless man. The woman stepped forward, unarmed but unyielding, voice a trembling whisper, sharpened by resolve. "We won't go quietly into their night." Her words stretched taut across the chasm of fear and courage. Chaos erupted as horses reared and riders cursed, gunfire splintering night's calm. The cabin shuddered beneath the first brutal blows, the breaking of fragile walls, the ignition of a reckoning long overdue. In the blaze of lantern light and shadows, the guerrero slipped through the chaos, drawing the woman close, leading her along a hidden path, winding beneath thorns and broken earth. Each step was a gamble, a defiant dance against the tightening noose of the PATRULHA's merciless hunt. His voice was low, a fierce murmur carried by the wind. They come not only for me, for us, for every whisper of defiance this land still holds. She nodded, eyes alight with fierce determination. Then we fight, not just for ourselves, but for every silenced voice. The path swallowed them in shadow, but behind their flight, the night roared alive with hunters' cruel clamor, relentless and unforgiving. An ancient feud rekindled, not merely a battle for flesh and blood, but for the soul of a land weighed down by scars and broken promises. From the forest's depths, a shadow broke free, an unexpected figure emerging fast, face hidden but intent unmistakable. Hands raised in warning, he called out, "Hold fast! The PATRULHA's hunt is no mere man-chase. They bring fire, a war unseen yet burning." The guerrero's eyes narrowed, sensing the tremors beneath his feet, the winds of fate gathering like tempests on a dark horizon. The woman's breath caught, her cage shattered, replaced now by peril's sharp edge and fierce resolve. Behind them, hoofbeats multiplied, the relentless drum of death encircling. Yet deep within their chests, a fragile flame glowed, an ember forged by pain, hope, and an unyielding will. Then, as dawn clawed its way through the suffocating night, a fierce cry sliced the air. No surrender, but a call to reckoning, wild and unrelenting. The guerrero turned, voice sharp and low, slicing the hush. They chase a fire too fierce to burn. Tonight, the frontier bleeds, and no shadow will hide its truths. Her eyes locked on the breaking light over the ridge. A silent vow passed between them. And beyond shattered walls, the battle's storm surged. Suddenly, a sharp crack, different from gunfire. A deliberate shot, fired close and true, cutting through the chaos and freezing all in a single, shattering moment. Betrayal. The shatter of splintering wood ripped through the night like a jagged scream. The cabin's fragile door gave way under the weight of merciless hands and brutal force. Shadows spilled inside, sharp and jagged, flooding the cramped space with cold, steel, and relentless intent. The woman's breath hitched, her heart a wild drum, pounding a frantic rhythm against years of silence and fear. Just moments before, the faint window of trust had cracked open between her and the guerrero Apache. Now that fragile connection trembled beneath a dark tidal wave of danger sweeping through the room. Body pressed low into the jagged shadows of the crags, muscles coiled tight as stretched wire. His eyes flicked in restless vigilance, reading the thinning veil between hunter and hunted. The relentless PATRULHA had closed their circle, wolves sharpening their teeth beneath the pale, unforgiving moonlight. Inside, the woman crouched, knuckles white around the tin she'd hidden beneath the floorboards. It was no match for rifles and rage, but it was everything she had, a poker's last desperate gamble against the wild storm raging against her door. Her breath came ragged, a whispered prayer caught in the throes of terror and reluctant determination. Boots crashed across splintered floorboards. Close now, a chorus of harsh voices and curses crackling like fire. The air itself felt hammered, raw with the clench of steel and the unbearable weight of impending destruction. Yet, in the heart of the storm, her eyes lifted. seeking refuge, searching for a thread of hope beyond the fracturing walls. Out beyond the cabin, the guerrero moved like a shadow birthed of the land itself, silent as dusk, swift as desperate wind through cracked sagebrush. His dark eyes blazed fierce under bearers of death. His hand pressed fiercely against the worn emblem stitched beneath his shirt, a symbol heavier than the rifles aimed to end his breath. Shouts spilled raw and tangled, restlessness clawing at the night's edges. The PATRULHA pressed forward, cold, precise, heartless, blind to the fragile fire. The fierce bond quietly forged within those battered walls. Suddenly, slicing the dark like a sharp blade, a lone rider burst forth from the north, an urgent silhouette carved from chaos. His face was a hard storm of warning and fear, eyes blazing a raw message no time could twist or soften. The guerrero stopped. Instincts flared, a flash of recognition fierce and fleeting. Friend or shadowed enemy, hope or doom? There was no moment for doubt. Time offered only the brutal necessity of trust born in desperation. "They're closing fast," the rider gasped, his voice ragged like fractured leather. Minutes, maybe less. Nothing left but a blind charge. Every heartbeat hammered a jagged war drum in the woman's chest. Rising, she met the guerrero's steel gaze, unflinching and wild. His single nod unleashed a wave of fierce energy through her trembling limbs. They were no longer prisoners of silence or fear. They stood bound by the cruel hand of fate, tethered to a fragile, burning spark of desperate hope. Outside, hoofbeats rumbled, a thunder that shattered cracked earth and snatched breath from dry sagebrush. Rifles glinted pale in the indifferent moonlight, teeth bared and deadly. Then, a cry, raw, ancient, primal, as if the land itself groaned beneath the weight of man's relentless hunt. The guerrero's breath snagged sharply. Fingers clutched his tribe's fading emblem as if to anchor the storm. That cry was no mere sound. It was a call to battle, whispered by the spirits of the land, refusing submission to cold, cruel men. The woman stepped forward, bare and trembling, her voice a fragile blade cut from fire and resolve. "We won't fade quietly into the night." Her words stretched taut between heartbreak and defiance, a banner raised in the face of doom. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, riders cursed, gunfire shattered night's fragile cloak. The cabin shuddered beneath the first savage blows. The breaking, the splintering, the unleashing of a reckoning long overdue. Through the blaze of lantern flame and shattering shadows, the guerrero slipped like smoke through the turmoil. Drawing the woman close, he guided her through a hidden path woven beneath thorn and broken earth. Each desperate step was a dance on the knife edge between survival and certain death. His voice dropped low, a fierce, urgent murmur carried by chilled winds. "They come not just for me, for us, for every whisper, every ember of defiance still beating in this land." Her eyes, fierce and burning, met his unwavering resolve. "Then we fight, not only for ourselves, but for every voice they tried to silence." The narrow path swallowed them whole, shadows clinging like second skin. Behind them, the night roared, hunters snarling, the hunt relentless and unforgiving. An ancient feud reignited, not only for life nor death, but for the soul buried beneath broken promises and scars carved into the very bones of this land. From the thickets, a shadow tore free, a figure emerging with hands raised, voice sharp and urgent. Hold fast. The PATRULHA's hunt isn't a mere chase. They bring fire, a war unseen but burning. The guerrero's gaze hardened, sensing the tremors beneath the earth, the shifting winds of fate gathering like storms on a dark horizon. The woman's breath rattled, her cage shattered, but exchanged for the fierce edge of peril and raw resolve. Behind them, hoofbeats multiplied, the relentless drum of death circling ever tighter. Yet deep within their chests flickered a fragile flame, an ember forged from pain, hope, and unbreakable will. As dawn clawed its way through suffocating night, a fierce cry tore the air, not surrender, but a challenge wild and unyielding. The guerrero turned, voice low and slicing through the cold. They chase a fire too fierce to burn. Tonight, the frontier bleeds, and no shadow will smother the truths it carries. Her eyes locked on the rising light breaking over the ridge, a silent vow passing between them, between shattered walls and impending storms. And then a sharp crack rang out, different from the rifles, a single deliberate bullet, fired close and true, cutting through the chaos with the sickening weight of betrayal. The sharp crack echoed, more deliberate than the frantic gunfire tearing the night apart. It was a betrayal, sudden and cruel, slicing through the chaos like a knife through wet cloth. The room froze, breaths caught in strangled gasps, shadows halting mid-dance with fear. The woman's wide eyes locked on the shattered doorway, muscles tensing as the weight of that single shot pressed down like a stone, crushing hope. Outside, figures surged forward amid curses and shouted warnings. The relentless PATRULHA was closing in, their circle tightening like a noose soaked in wrath. But the guerrero APACHE was no stranger to death's gaze. His eyes, dark and fierce, swept the scene with sharpened clarity that bore both pain and unbroken defiance. Every instinct screamed, this was no accident. Danger now lurked, not only at the edges of battle, but within the fragile bond they had barely begun to forge. His senses sought the source, not just of the bullet, but of the fracture tearing trust asunder. The woman, her resolve burning brighter beneath terror's ash, pressed herself against a jagged wall. Blood throbbed at her temple, the faint metallic tang, a cruel reminder of their deadly stakes. Her hands clutched the splintered wood of the shattered doorframe, as if it were the last anchor to a world slipping fast into ruin. Behind her, harsh footsteps grew louder, boots pounding relentless on cracked earth as the PATRULHA pressed ever closer. Whispered commands in harsh, guttural tones tangled with the night's cold wind. The ancient hills seemed to close in, swallowing light and sound alike. The guerrero's gaze darted, calculating, fierce. He moved like the silent breath of the desert wind, slipping between falling shadows with a predator's grace. His hand found the worn emblem stitched beneath his shirt, a symbol heavier than any rifle's weight, a promise, a memory, a call to bear the spirit of his people beyond death's edge. "Behind you," he muttered, voice low but sharp, a warning as cold and raw as the night. The woman spun, barely catching a blurred form rising out of the darkness, a figure cloaked in secrecy and desperation lurched forward, a man with eyes wild and heart racing against the unforgiving tide. Recognition sparked. A traitor? A desperate ally? Fear tangled with hope, every second stretched thin in the indifferent night. Before she could speak, the shadow moved, raising a trembling hand. "Wait. I came to warn you," he gasped, breath ragged like broken glass. "They're not just hunters. This is a purge, a reckoning no one outside this cursed land sees coming." The guerrero's jaw clenched. Betrayal and survival twisted their dance beneath rustling trees and cracked stones. There was no time to unravel truth from lies, only to act, to run, to fight, or perish in the dark. A harsh rumble surged through the valley as the PATRULHA's formation tightened. Rifles raised again, primed and deadly under the indifferent moonlight. The distant howls of dogs sliced through the cold air, a reminder of the relentless pursuit. "Follow me," the guerrero hissed, pulling the woman toward a hidden crevice veiled by brambles and ancient roots. "There's a way beneath the earth, a narrow path no sane man dares to trace." She nodded, swallowing the panic clawing at her throat. Her heart pounded a fierce rhythm of desperation and unyielding will. Shadows swallowed them as they slipped into darkness, the cold earth pressing close like a lover's embrace, tight, unforgiving. The narrow tunnel swallowed their whispered breaths, the faint echo of their footsteps blending with the distant thunder of hooves and shouts. Every crack in the earth whispered secrets of survival and rage, memories buried deep beneath the land's cracked skin. Emerging briefly into a moonlit hollow, the woman glimpsed the fierce determination burning in the guerrero's eyes. For a moment, time seemed to still. The world balanced on a thin edge between ruin and hope. "We can't run forever," she whispered, voice trembling yet fierce. "They'll come with fire next. We must be ready." His eyes darkened, the burden of a people's scars heavy in their depths. "Then we stand, not as prisoners of this land's old hate, but as its reckoning." Before she could respond, a sudden crack echoed through the hollow, snapping a branch, or something far more sinister. They froze, senses stretched taut as wire. The wind shifted, carrying a scent sharp and unfamiliar, smoke twisted with something colder, more dreadful. Behind them, the distant ridge pulsed with flickering light, a new force, unseen until now, staking its claim in the deadly dance of shadow and flame. The guerrero's hand shot to the emblem on his chest again, fingers curling fiercely around the faded symbol. He lowered his voice to a low growl, heavy, with warning. "They believe their darkness will hide their sins, but tonight the fire in our veins will burn brighter than any shadow." The woman swallowed hard, the weight of years breaking free in that moment of raw truth. Her trembling hands clenched at the damp earth, the cold biting hard, but her spirit fiercer still. A sudden crack shattered the silence. A rifle shot again, closer this time, the sound slicing through the hollow like a jagged scream. The shadow moved, fast, desperate, a figure lunging from the brush, face twisted in agony and resolve. A flash of steel caught the moonlight, a glint of betrayal shining sharp and cold. The guerrero snarled, launching forward to intercept the threat as the woman stepped back, breath caught in silent horror. "Trust no one," the rider's voice rasped, eyes burning with the knowledge of pain far older than the hate in their hunters' hearts. The tunnel's mouth loomed ahead, a cold maw promising refuge or doom. Behind them, the growing chorus of hooves and men's voices surged, a tempest gathering the storm of blood and reckoning that would drown the night. The woman's eyes locked with the guerrero's, fierce and unyielding, a silent vow cast in shadows and fire. The dark whispered around them, but beneath it, a spark still blazed, relentless, defiant and alive. And then, the ground trembled beneath a sound unlike any before, a low, haunting cry rising from the deep wilds beyond the mountains, a primal summons answering the call of the burning frontier. They had fled the shadows. Now the storm was coming for them. The shattered door gave way to a violent rush of cold air and harsh voices, tearing apart the fragile grip of silence they had held so briefly. The cabin, once a sanctuary carved from isolation, became a battleground of shadows and whispered fears. Inside, she pressed herself against the splintered wood, breath hitching as the weight of their peril crashed down like a storm. Outside, the relentless patrol, relentless as the unforgiving land itself, tightened their encirclement. The hooves drummed like thunder, rolling over cracked earth, the riders' forms swallowed and reshaped by moonlight and dust. The guerrero Apache moved like a ghost among jagged rocks and thorny brush, his dark eyes burning with fierce purpose. His hand gripped the fading emblem sewn beneath his shirt, a symbol heavier than any rifle aimed his way. The chaos inside crashed louder, the sharp clang of boots on boards, the murmurs of orders carried on a rough wind. But beneath it all was a deeper tremor, a tension slicing thin the fragile thread that had begun to weave. Trust between hunter and hunted. They were no longer two solitary souls trapped in separate cages, but a fragile alliance casting defiance like flint sparks into a dry, suffocating world. A sudden figure tore the night's dark fabric, a rider bursting from the north, urgency carving every sharp line of his face. His eyes blazed wild warnings, voice ragged like the land itself. They close fast, minutes, maybe less. The guerrero's muscles tightened, every instinct screaming. The woman leaned into that furious gaze, strength flowing back into her trembling limbs. They stood at a crossroads of fate, caught between the shadow of death's pursuit and a fragile flicker of hope. "Not just for me, for us all," he hissed, voice low but sharp as flint, "for every whispered defiance buried beneath this land." Her nod was fierce, eyes burning. "Then we fight, not for freedom alone, but for the silenced." Beyond, the patrol's circle narrowed, rifles gleaming like spectral talons beneath indifferent stars. Then, An ancient call shattered the night's breath, raw and wild as the earth itself. The cry was more than sound. It was a summons, rebellion etched in the language of wind and stone. The guerrero's breath caught. Fingers clenched the tribal emblem with desperate reverence. The woman's voice, fragile and fierce, cut through the cold. "We won't fade quietly into their night." Her declaration stretched tight between terror and courage, a banner against encroaching doom. The raid erupted, horses rearing, curses like fire, gunfire splintering the fragile calm. The cabin shook under brutal blows, the breaking of wood, the unraveling of fragile walls, a reckoning long overdue. Through the storm's heart, the guerrero guided her, shadows swallowing their desperate flight. Thorn and broken earth hid the narrow path, a silent artery winding beneath. Hostile air. Every step gnawed at the noose tightening around them. "They come for more than me," he murmured, voice a thread in the roaring night. "For every ember of resistance this land holds." Her eyes burned anew. "Then we stand, for every voice they crushed." The tunnel embraced them, swallowing their whispered breaths amid thunderous hooves and rising chaos. Beneath cracked soil, secrets of survival and rage lingered, buried by time and blood. A sudden shadow emerged, the figure with hands raised, voice urgent. "Hold fast! This hunt is no mere chase. They bring fire, a war unseen yet raging." The guerrero's gaze hardened. The earth beneath him trembled with gathering storms of fate. The woman's breath snagged, her cage shattered, replaced by the piercing edge of peril and resolve. Behind, the hunters closed, the drum of death tightening. But within their chests glowed an ember, an unyielding flame forged from pain, hope, and iron will. Dawn's claws sliced the night, and a fierce cry rent the air. Not surrender, but a summons wild and unrelenting. They hunt a fire too fierce to burn. The guerrero's voice sliced the cold. Tonight, the frontier bleeds. No shadow will hide the truths it bears. Her eyes met the rising light, a silent oath bridging shattered walls and coming storms. Then, the crack, different from gunfire, a single, deliberate shot, sharp and cold, slicing through chaos with the weight of betrayal. The blast silenced the night's fury, freezing the moment in a heart-stopping knife edge. Hearts thundered, eyes darted, trust fractured like broken glass. He pressed deeper into shadowed crags, muscles taut, eyes shimmering with raw defiance. The PATRULHA circle, once loose, was a tightened noose soaked in wrath and iron. Inside, she clung to her last hope, a battered tin beneath floorboards, her only weapon against the merciless swarm. Her breath faltered, terror and resolve locked in fierce combat. Boots crashed closer, voices braided with curses and steel. Yet amid the storm, her gaze searched beyond shattered walls, hungry for a thread of hope. The guerrero moved like a desert wind, silent, swift, relentless. His fingers clenched the tribal emblem, a weighted promise to honor and survival. "Behind you," he snarled, a whisper sharp as the cold air. She spun, barely seeing the blurred form rising, a man veiled in shadow and desperation. Recognition sparked. Traitor? Ally? Fear tangled with hope. Wait, he gasped, breath harsh as shattered glass. I came to warn. They don't hunt just bodies. This is a purge, a reckoning unseen by most. The guerrero's jaw clenched, betrayal and survival colliding. No time for doubt, only action, only fight or fall. The valley trembled as the PATRULHA noose drew tight. Rifles raised, shimmering and merciless. Dogs howled, a reminder, death's pursuit is endless. Follow me, the guerrero commanded, dragging her toward a hidden crevice veiled beneath ancient roots. A narrow path no sane man traces. She obeyed, swallowing panic, heart pounding, fierce and wild. Darkness swallowed them, a cold embrace, relentless and cruel. Steps echoed faint as distant thunder, whispering secrets of rage and resilience beneath cracked earth. Emerging briefly, her eyes found the guerreros, determined, burdened, fierce. Time suspended, balanced between ruin and hope. We can't run forever, she whispered. They'll bring fire next. We must be ready. His eyes darkened, weight of scars in their depths. Then we stand, not prisoners of old hate, but as its reckoning. Sudden crack, snapped branch or worse, frozen, senses honed taut. Wind shifted, carrying smoke mixed with dread. The ridge glowed with flickering flames, a new power staking claim in shadow and flame. Fingers curled tight on the emblem. They think shadows hide sins. Tonight, our fire burns brighter. She swallowed hard, years breaking free in raw truth. Hands clenched earth, cold biting fierce, but spirit fiercer. A rifle shot cracked again, closer, slicing hollow silence. Shadow lunged, a twisted face of agony and resolve. Steel flashed cold as betrayal. The guerrero surged forward, growling. She recoiled, breath caught in silent dread. Trust no one, the rider rasped, eyes burning with ancient pain. Tunnel mouth loomed, a cold maw, promising refuge or death. Behind, the tempest roared, hooves, voices, storms of blood and reckoning. Eyes locked, silent vow, forged in shadows and fire. Darkness whispered, but beneath it, a defiant spark burned, relentless, unyielding, alive. Then a low, haunting cry rose from wilds beyond mountains, an ancient summons answering the frontier's burning call. They had fled. The storm was coming for them. Suddenly a blade of cold steel flashed, a swift movement, and a single piercing scream tore the night. Betrayal had found its mark. The splinters from the shattered door lay scattered, like broken promises, across the cabin's worn floorboards. The woman's breath hitched, her heart, a desperate drum, pounding against the fragile thread of hope that had flickered just moments before. Around her, shadows twisted and surged, the PATRULHA's heavy boots crashing in relentless waves closer and closer. Each step a dark thunder that battered the walls of her solitude. Outside, the guerrero APACHE wove through jagged rocks and thorny brush, a living shadow born of the land's fierce spirit. His eyes, sharp and burning, caught every flicker of moonlight on rifles raised like hawk's talons. Every whispered curse floating on the cutting cold wind. His hand gripped. The worn emblem beneath his shirt. The weight of his people's legacy pressed close to his chest, anchoring him in the storm. Within the chaos of the cabin, the woman crouched low, knuckles whitening around the tin she had hidden beneath the floorboards. A pitiful weapon, yet everything she had. Terror and defiance battled in her ragged breaths. The years of silence breaking beneath a voice she did not expect to hear. Suddenly, a rough voice rose from the northwest. Urgent, ragged, raw with desperation. The silhouette of a lone rider tore through night's veil, his eyes wild torches in the darkness. His warning cut sharp like a blade. They're closing fast, no more than minutes before the noose snaps tight. The Guerrero's body tensed, every muscle coiling with silent fury. His gaze locked with hers, fiery and unyielding, as the alliance forged in whispered breaths, solidified into iron resolve. "They come not just for me," he hissed, voice tight as a drawn bowstring. "For all of us, for every ember of defiance still breathing in this scorched land." Her throat tightened, flame kindling behind her eyes. "Then we fight, not just for ourselves, but for every silent voice crushed in the dust." The blast of hooves grew deafening, rolling over cracked earth and tangled sagebrush with relentless menace. The PATRULHA circled tighter, rifles gleaming cold beneath the indifferent moonlight, specters poised to snuff out any flicker of rebellion. Then, cutting through the roar, came an ancient, wild cry, a primal summons from the land itself, raw and unbroken. It was not mere sound, but a challenge sent from bones of earth and spirit, rising against man's cold machinery of hate. A sharp breath caught in the Guerrero's throat, fingers clutching the tribal emblem with desperate reverence. As the night rippled with that savage, sacred call, the woman rose, hands trembling yet steady, voice trembling with fierce defiance. "We will not fade quietly into their night." Her words stretched taut between fear and courage, an unyielding banner against engulfing darkness. Suddenly, chaos erupted, horses rearing wild, riders cursing like storms, gunfire splintering night's fragile veil. The cabin groaned, assaulted by brutal blows, wood fracturing in thunderous percussion. The reckoning had come long overdue. Amidst the turmoil, the Guerrero drew her close, guiding her with the instinct of a hunter born wild and free. Together, they vanished down a narrow, hidden path blanketed by thorn and broken earth, but desperate gambit against the tightening noose. "They seek more than my blood," he growled low, words slipping through the rasp of night. "They hunt the restless spirit in every corner of this land." Her eyes burned, bright with new fire. "Then let us stand, not as prisoners of the past, but its reckoning." The earth swallowed them beneath the twisted shadows, their whispered breaths weaving into the pounding pulse of the night, a living promise etched with rage and hope. From the forest's depths, a shadow broke loose, a figure emerging swift, hands raised in warning, voice fierce and urgent. "Hold fast, the Patrulha's hunt is no mere chase. They bring fire, a war unseen, yet burning." The Guerrero's gaze sharpened, sensing the tremors beneath the ground, the shifting winds of fate gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. The woman's breath caught, the shattered cage of her past replaced by the cutting edge of peril and fierce resolve. Behind them, the hunter's circle tightened, the drumbeat of death gaining cruel volume. Yet, within each heartbeat, burned a flicker, an ember glowing stubborn with the pain. Hope and unyielding will of survivors. Dawn clawed at the horizon with jagged claws, slicing night's throat with savage light. And through the breaking silence, a fierce cry tore the air. A raw summons, not to surrender, but to reckoning. The guerrero turned, voice sharp as flint, cutting through cold dawn's breath. They chase a fire too fierce to burn. Tonight, the frontier bleeds, and no shadow will smother the truths it bears. Her eyes locked on the rising sun, a silent vow passing like wildfire between them, between shattered walls and storm-racked ridges. Then, shattering the fragile cadence of battle, a sudden, sharp crack rang out, different from gunfire, deliberate and cold, a single bullet piercing the chaos, slicing the night's roar with the shattered weight of betrayal. Every breath caught, every shadow froze, trust shattered. In that frozen heartbeat, the woman glimpsed the twisted face of treachery. Ali unmasked, a knife plunged deep beneath the blackened cloak of friendship. The guerrero's fierce eyes blazed with raw fury as danger's web tightened. The hunt no longer only by the PATRULHA, but now poisoned from within their own fractured circle. The land held its breath, waiting for the reckoning to consume them all. The smoke from the shattered door still curled in the cold night air, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the damp earth beneath their feet. The betrayal's shot had shattered not only wood, but trust, and the cabin trembled with the weight of a reckoning that none had dared to speak aloud. The woman's breath came ragged, her knuckles whitening on the jagged remains of the doorframe. The man who had stabbed their fragile alliance with a bullet now lay slumped beneath the broken threshold, lifeblood seeping silently into the earth. Around them, the merciless patrol pressed in, their rifles aimed like cold sentinels, poised for the final strike. But the guerrero Apache was not a man easily cornered. In the shadowed brush beyond, he moved with the desperate grace of the land itself, sharp, silent, and fierce. His eyes, dark and burning, swept the hunter's forms, each marked by fear and greed, none bearing mercy. Amidst the growing chaos, he slipped forward, papered by darkness and resolve. There was no time for hesitation, no room for doubt. The burden of his people's legacy, and now this woman's fragile hope, welded his will with iron. Suddenly, he was at her side, pulling her from the debris with hands strong but gentle. "We cannot fall here," he hissed, voice raw but steady. "They come for more than us, for every whisper of defiance left breathing in this land." She swallowed her fear, nodding. Her eyes, once muted by years of silent captivity, now burned bright with resolve. "Then we fight, not just to live, but to live free." Together, they moved as one, threading through the tangled underbrush to a hidden crevice beneath ancient roots, their only refuge in a world turned ruthless. Around them, the thunder of hooves and shouts swelled, the patrol's relentless hunt tightening like a noose. Their breaths mingled in the cold night, a pact unspoken and fierce. From the depths of the woods, an unexpected figure emerged, the lone rider from before, eyes wide with urgency and unresolved pain. "This ends tonight," he warned, voice hushed but fierce. "They bring fire, not just to burn, but to erase all that dares to live differently." The guerrero's jaw clenched, the weight of history pressed down like a stone, encouraging no surrender. "Then we become the storm that fire cannot consume." The woman raised her chin, the rust of old fears left behind. "For every silence they forced, we will shout. For every chain they forged, we break." Together, they climbed from the hidden hollow, stepping into the blackened clearing where dawn's first light fractured the night. The patrol formed a tightening circle, rifles gleaming like specters in the gray. Yet the guerrero stood tall, eyes blazing with unyielding fire. At his side, the woman bore the scars of both captivity and newfound courage. Between them lay something fierce, an unspoken truth that crossed boundaries and wounds alike. Without a word, the guerrero drew his weapon, a bow carved with the symbols of his ancestors. He nocked an arrow, its flight swift and sure as the rising sun. Around them, the patrol tensed, but hesitation had crept into their ranks. The shock of one who refuses to fade quietly unsettled the merciless. Then came the wild cry from the land itself, a primal call that echoed through the valleys and peaks, mourning and defiance carved into its timber. It was the voice of a people not yet broken, a spirit too fierce to die in silence. The first volley cracked through the dawn, not from the hunters, but from allies who had silently gathered, warriors who had chosen this moment to answer the call. Shots rang out, the air ripping with sudden battle cries that shattered the long silence. The woman ducked beside the guerrero, their backs pressed close, as the world exploded in danger and hope entwined. Their eyes met, a vow passing between them, that they would hold fast, that this fire could not be quenched. Amidst the chaos, the woman felt a hand clasp hers, steady, sure. The guerrero's grip was a lifeline, a promise that neither solitude nor fear would claim them again. As the battle swirled around the last cabin standing in this forsaken land, the sky brightened with the promise of dawn. The cries of the old world clashed against the roar of those reborn in fire and spirit. The scars of the past would not vanish, but neither would the oath forged that night. When the dust finally settled, the patrol lay broken and dispersed. The land, scarred but breathing, welcomed a fragile peace. The guerrero and the woman stood amid the quiet, shadows retreating as the sun's golden hands reached across the plains. She turned toward him, voice soft but steady. "This land isn't just ours to survive. It's ours to remember and to cherish." He nodded, eyes reflecting the dawn. "And to protect with every breath." Together they walked from the ruins, each step a testament to resilience beyond pain and betrayal. The woman, once a ghost in a cage, was now a beacon of defiance and hope. The guerrero, once chased by history, was a living testament to endurance and rightful spirit. As the morning light bathed the valleys, the story of their stand spread like wildfire, in whispered legends, sung in the wind, etched in the very bones of the frontier. The fire they kindled refused to die, carried forward by every soul brave enough to defy the silence. Their journey had ended, but the legacy had only just begun. And beneath the vast, endless sky, two spirits, once fractured by fear and betrayal, stood united, unbroken, and free.